The downtown restaurant hummed with its usual chorus of clattering silverware, overlapping conversations, and the faint buzz of the jukebox in the corner. To most people, it was just another evening. Families leaning over booths, couples sipping from wine glasses, and waiters weaving between tables balancing trays. But to Daniel, nights like this weren't just routine. They were rare gifts. At the corner table, Daniel sat with his 10-year-old daughter, Emily. Her sneakers dangled just above the tile floor, tapping the faint rhythm of a song half lost beneath the crowd's chatter. Her plate of macaroni and cheese was already half finished, and she had made a game of balancing noodles on her spoon, like a circus performer walking a tightrope. "Daddy, look," she whispered with wide eyes. She tilted the spoon until the pasta tumbled back onto her plate, and erupted into giggles at her own little victory. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "That's some impressive balance. Maybe I should sign you up for the circus." Emily leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Only if you're the clown, Daddy. You'd have to wear the big shoes." Her laughter filled the air, sweeter than the jukebox tune, sweeter than anything Daniel could order off the menu. For him, this wasn't just dinner. This was memory. Every laugh, every glance, every inside joke was a reminder of how quickly time slipped away. He had taken on a role of raising Emily alone, and though the weight of it never left him, it made moments like these sacred. Emily tilted her head, studying him. "You look tired," she said softly. Daniel smiled, brushing concern aside. "That's because you wore me out at the park earlier. You're running faster every week." "Not faster than you," she replied instantly, her eyes shining with certainty. He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her about the aches in his knees or the exhaustion that clung to him after long days at work. To her, he wanted to be the man who never fell behind, the one who could always keep up. That was enough. He reached across the table, brushing a crumb from her cheek. "Eat a little more, sweetheart. Maybe we'll split a dessert after." Her face lit up. "Ice cream." "Ice cream," he confirmed, though he knew the sugar rush would keep her awake later. Some rules were meant to bend on nights like this. Emily was in the middle of telling him how her art teacher made paint water look like rainbow soup when her voice trailed off. Her fork hovered midair, her smile fading. She tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice uneasy. She looked scared. Daniel followed her gaze. Across the restaurant near the bar, a young woman stood pressed against the wall. Her hair, once neatly pinned, had strands falling loose. Two men had cornered her, their voices sharp, mocking. Too loud for comfort. One reached toward her arm, ignoring the way she shook her head. The other leaned in close, his grin edged with malice. She sidestepped, but he blocked her path with casual ease. Daniel scanned the room. People hadn't noticed. He could see it in their furtive glances, in the way diners buried themselves in menus or stared hard at their drinks. A couple whispered behind their hands. A man pulled out his phone, not to call for help, but to use as a shield. Waiters exchanged nervous looks, but didn't move. The silence of inaction was louder than any sound. Emily's fists clenched against the table. Why isn't anyone helping her? Daniel felt the weight of the question sink deep. He had seen scenes like this before, not in restaurants, but in places where hesitation could mean death. Here, the stakes were different, but no less real. A crowded room full of capable people, all choosing to look away. Emily's wide eyes locked on him. She already knew her answer. If no one else would act, her father would. Daniel exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He laid his napkin carefully beside his plate, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Then he leaned closer to Emily, his voice calm but firm. "Stay right here, sweetheart." Her lips parted, ready to protest, but his tone stilled her. She nodded reluctantly, her small fingers gripping the edge of the table like an anchor. Daniel pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood against tile went unnoticed in the hum of the restaurant. Every step toward the bar was deliberate, measured, not rushed, not hesitant, but inevitable. Emily's whisper followed him across the room, too soft for anyone else but sharp in his heart. "Be careful, Daddy." He heard her. He always would. The young woman pressed tighter against the wall as one man's hand brushed her sleeve. Her eyes darted desperately around the room, finding no help, until they landed on Daniel. For a heartbeat, disbelief crossed her face. Someone was actually coming. Daniel stepped into the narrow space between her and the men. His frame wasn't the largest in the room, but the calm, immovable gravity in his stance shifted the air. "Hey, buddy, mind your own business," the taller man sneered, his smirk practiced, worn by years of getting away with too much. Daniel didn't look at him. His focus was on the woman, angling his body to give her room to breathe. His voice was steady, low, and firm. "Let her go." The simple words carried weight. The chatter of nearby tables faltered. The woman blinked, startled by how unshaken he sounded. The men exchanged a glance, their smirks thinner now. The second man leaned closer, mocking. "And who exactly are you? Her boyfriend? Her babysitter?" He barked a laugh, nudging his friend. Daniel's stance didn't shift. He placed one foot forward, shoulders squared. His voice cut through the air, calm and sharp. "I said let her go." The woman's eyes filled with desperate hope. Emily's small hands gripped her table tighter, her heart pounding as she watched her father stand alone where no one else would. The restaurant held its breath. The taller man straightened, his jaw tightening at Daniel's tone. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He wasn't used to being challenged, not in a room full of people who usually looked the other way. "Look, old man," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Why don't you sit back down with your kid before you get yourself hurt?" Daniel's eyes didn't leave his. Calm, unwavering, controlled. It wasn't a threat. It was presence. A presence the two men hadn't expected. The second man shifted, his bravado faltering under the silence. He laughed nervously, but it didn't carry the same confidence as before. "Come on, we're just talking. No harm done." Daniel's gaze flicked briefly toward the woman. Her hands trembled where they clutched her purse, her breaths shallow. He angled himself slightly more, giving her space behind him. "You heard me," he said again, his voice low and deliberate. "It's over. Walk away." For a tense moment, no one moved. The restaurant seemed to shrink around them, the noise thinning until the only sound was the faint hum of the jukebox and the pounding of hearts that dared not speak. The taller man's hand curled into a fist, but the hesitation in his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't expected resistance. Not here, not from someone who looked so ordinary. He glanced around the room, searching for support in the crowd, but found only silence. Diners who had once ignored the scene now stared, some with wide eyes, others with lowered gazes of shame. The tide had shifted. The second man muttered under his breath, "This ain't worth it, man." The taller one hesitated. His pride screamed to stay, but his instincts whispered to leave. And slowly, pride gave way. He shoved his hands into his pockets, masking his retreat with a scoff. "Whatever. She ain't worth the trouble." With a final glare, he jerked his chin at his friend, and the two of them slunk out the door, their false bravado collapsing with every step. The air rushed back into the restaurant like a collective exhale. Conversation trickled in again, tentative, awkward. People shifted in their seats, pretending to return to normal, though the weight of what they had just witnessed still clung to the room. The young woman pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing shaky. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Then her eyes lifted to Daniel's, glassy with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the restaurant. Daniel gave her a small nod, not seeking recognition, not basking the role he had taken. He simply stepped aside, giving her back her space. "You're safe now," he said softly. The woman lingered for a moment, as if she wanted to say more, but words failed. With trembling steps, she slipped toward the door, escaping into the night. Daniel watched her leave, his expression unreadable. Only when the door swung shut behind her did he allow himself a quiet breath. Across the room, Emily sat frozen, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had seen everything. The men, their cruelty, the way no one else moved, and the way her father stood when no one else dared. As Daniel walked back toward their table, the weight of dozens of eyes followed him, some filled with shame, others with respect, and a few with quiet admiration. but he didn't acknowledge any of them. His world shrank back to the small girl waiting for him in the corner booth. Emily's gaze met his as he slid back into his seat. She didn't speak at first, just studied him like she was memorizing the shape of his face, the steady calm that hadn't wavered. Finally, she whispered, "Daddy." He leaned forward, his voice gentle now, the edge of confrontation gone. "Yes, sweetheart." Her eyes shone, her small hands trembling as they reached across the table for his. "You weren't scared." Daniel squeezed her fingers, grounding her. He considered the question carefully. He could tell her no, that he was never afraid. He could paint himself as the unshakable hero she believed him to be. But he didn't. He bent closer, his voice low and honest. "I was scared," he admitted. "But sometimes doing the right thing means you have to be brave even when you're scared." Emily's lips parted as she absorbed the words. Her eyes glistened, not with fear anymore, but with something deeper, understanding. She nodded slowly, gripping his hand tighter. "You saved her," she whispered, her voice thick. Daniel smiled faintly. "I helped her. That's all." Silence hung between them for a moment, filled with unspoken lessons. Around them, the restaurant tried to return to normal, but Daniel knew Emily would never forget what she saw. Neither would he. A waitress finally approached their table, her steps hesitant. She set down the check with a nervous smile, her voice soft. "That was brave. Not many people would have done what you did." Daniel gave a polite nod, not needing the acknowledgement. His eyes stayed on Emily, who was still holding his hand, like it was the only thing anchoring her in that moment. The waitress lingered for a second longer, then slipped away. Emily finally released his hand, sitting up straighter. Her voice was small but steady when she asked, "Can we still get ice cream?" Daniel chuckled, the sound breaking the heavy air like sunlight cutting through clouds. "Yeah, kiddo, we definitely can." Her smile bloomed again, fragile but genuine, and in that moment, Daniel knew she had seen more than just danger tonight. She had seen the weight of courage, the cost of silence, and the choice her father made when no one else would. Later, as they left the restaurant hand in hand, Emily glanced up at him under the glow of the streetlights. "Daddy." "Yeah." She squeezed his fingers tightly. "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." The words struck deeper than any praise, deeper than any thanks. Daniel looked down at his daughter, her small face lit with quiet determination, and he felt the swell of pride and fear that only a parent could know. He didn't reply right away. He just smiled, brushing her hair from her face, and whispered, "You already are." And as they walked into the night, the restaurant fading behind them, Daniel realized that sometimes the greatest battles weren't about strength or victory. They were about showing the next generation what it meant to stand tall, even when the world chose silence.